So with small town America, you tend to get overlooked. I mean, like we're here in LA.
Yes.
It's a phenomenal city. We love it.
Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas weren't supposed to end up here. They were the quirky underdogs of HGTV, turning rundown Detroit houses into colorful, one-of-a-kind homes and winning fans with their authenticity. But behind the charm of Bargain Block was a storm brewing, one filled with long nights, harsh pressures, and battles with producers that would eventually erupt into one of the most shocking HGTV dramas in years. From whispers of unfair treatment on Rock the Block to the sudden cancellation of their own show. Join us to unveil the jaw-dropping truth, the truth about Keith and Evan. The rise of Keith and Evans.
A lot of experiences in the construction industry and a lot of homophobia and
Before they became household names on HGTV, Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas were just two dreamers chasing a vision that seemed almost impossible on paper. Neither came from the kind of flashy background you'd expect from reality television. Keith, an artist with a flair for bold, unconventional design, and Evan, a builder with a knack for structure and detail, weren't motivated by fame. They were motivated by a simple but radical idea: to take the forgotten homes of Detroit and turn them into something beautiful, affordable, and livable again. Their story starts far away from the Motor City. Keith grew up in West Texas, where he first began experimenting with art and design. He always leaned toward the creative side, fascinated by how colors, textures, and unusual combinations could transform the ordinary into the extraordinary. He wasn't afraid of going against the grain. Even early on, his work carried a sense of whimsy that would later define his TV persona. Evan, by contrast, was the pragmatist. With a background in engineering and a personality that balanced Keith's high-energy creativity, he was the one who figured out how to make Keith's big ideas physically possible. Where Keith saw wild possibilities, Evan saw the nuts and bolts of execution. The two met, clicked instantly, and quickly became partners not only in life but also in business. Their relationship was built on trust, patience, and a shared willingness to take risks. That willingness would be tested when they set their sights on Detroit, a city still recovering from the housing crisis, dotted with abandoned homes and entire neighborhoods that had fallen into disrepair. Most people saw Detroit's housing market as a disaster zone. Keith and Evan saw it as an opportunity, not just to build wealth, but to build community. They launched their company, 9 Design Plus Homes, with a mission that was equal parts ambitious and idealistic: to buy neglected houses in Detroit, renovate them on a tight budget, and then sell them at a price point working-class families could actually afford. They weren't flipping million-dollar mansions for quick profit. They were taking homes that others had written off as hopeless and breathing life back into them. And they did it with style. Keith's designs quickly became his signature. Instead of cookie-cutter renovations, he leaned into bold colors, quirky wallpaper, handmade art, and one-of-a-kind furniture pieces. Each home felt like a storybook come to life, filled with personality instead of sterile minimalism. Evan, meanwhile, kept the renovations grounded in solid craftsmanship. His attention to detail ensured that beneath the flashy exteriors were structurally sound homes that could stand the test of time. Together, they created something unique: houses that weren't just affordable but also joyful. It didn't take long for their work to start drawing attention. Locals were impressed by how these two outsiders were revitalizing neighborhoods in ways that felt authentic rather than exploitative. HGTV eventually came calling, intrigued by the couple's vision and charisma. The pitch was irresistible: a couple in love, transforming abandoned Detroit homes into colorful masterpieces, all while working on a shoestring budget. This wasn't just renovation television, it was a story of hope, creativity, and community revival. When Bargain Block premiered in 2021, it was an instant hit. Viewers fell in love with Keith and Evan's chemistry, their banter, and the way they poured themselves into each home. Unlike many renovation shows that leaned heavily on drama or cookie-cutter aesthetics, Bargain Block stood out for its heart. You could feel the sweat, the risk, and the genuine care they had for their projects. The show didn't just entertain, it inspired. Fans weren't just watching two men flip houses. They were watching two visionaries trying to rebuild a city, one block at a time. The early success was almost surreal. Suddenly, Keith and Evan were being recognized on the street. They were invited onto other HGTV specials, interviewed about their design philosophy, and celebrated as the new faces of the network's next generation. For a while, it seemed like everything was falling into place. They had found a national platform that allowed them to showcase not only their talents, but also their mission of affordable, artistic housing. But behind the smiles and quirky reveals, cracks were already beginning to show. The workload was enormous. Flipping houses on a tight budget for TV is a different beast than doing it privately. Long filming hours, constant pressure from producers, and the stress of running a real business on top of being TV personalities began to weigh on them. Keith's creativity and Evan's practicality were still in sync, but the demands of television were unlike anything they had faced before. Bargain Block and success. With the launch of Bargain Block, Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas became the unexpected breakout stars of HGTV. They didn't look or act like the polished TV couples audiences had grown accustomed to. They weren't overly rehearsed or staged. Instead, they were quirky, down-to-earth, and refreshingly real. Viewers loved Keith's unapologetic creativity and Evan's quiet steadiness. Together, they struck a balance that felt both entertaining and genuine. For a network often criticized for producing cookie-cutter content, Bargain Block offered something new. The premise was deceptively simple. Buy neglected homes in Detroit for dirt-cheap prices, transform them on a limited budget, and sell them affordably to new homeowners. But what made it extraordinary was the execution. Keith's wild imagination turned every project into a one-of-a-kind masterpiece. He used bold wallpaper patterns, daring color schemes, and thrifted or hand-built furniture that gave each house its own personality. Evan, meanwhile, was the anchor. While Keith painted walls magenta or designed a hand-carved coffee table, Evan was the one making sure the plumbing worked, the walls stood straight, and the foundations held. The show's early seasons leaned heavily on their chemistry. Watching Keith's free-spirited ideas clash with Evan's practical mindset made for great television. But it was more than banter. It was love and partnership on display. Fans could see that every decision came from a shared vision, even if they sometimes bickered along the way. Almost overnight, Bargain Block developed a loyal fan base. Social media buzzed with praise for their creativity. Detroit residents appreciated how the show shone a positive spotlight on their city, which was often portrayed negatively in national media. Critics applauded the heart at the center of the show. In a genre dominated by resale values and competition, Keith and Evan were building something more meaningful. Yet success came at a price. Renovating homes for television is a completely different challenge from flipping them privately. Instead of focusing solely on craftsmanship and design, every step had to be filmed, explained, and often repeated for multiple takes. Renovations that might normally take a few weeks stretched into months. Budgets became tighter as producers pushed for bigger wow moments on screen. The constant cameras created a pressure cooker environment. Keith thrived under the spotlight, at least at first. His larger-than-life personality and artistic flair made him the natural face of the show. But even he began to feel the strain. In interviews, he would later admit that the stress of filming sometimes overshadowed the joy of the work itself. Evan, more reserved by nature, handled the long hours in stride, but it wore on him too. Behind the lighthearted edits, there were sleepless nights, mounting exhaustion, and disagreements about how much they could take on. Another struggle was the financial risk. Unlike other HGTV shows where the network often subsidizes costs, Keith and Evan invested their own money into many of the projects. They weren't flipping multi-million-dollar homes in Los Angeles. They were trying to make affordable housing in Detroit both viable and beautiful. Every mistake, every delay, every unexpected expense ate into their bottom line. What viewers saw as a fun design experiment was, in reality, a high-stakes balancing act between creativity and survival. Then came the demands for expansion. As Bargain Block grew in popularity, HGTV naturally wanted more. Bigger reveals, more houses, flashier episodes. The couple was asked to participate in other specials, including Rock the Block, a competitive renovation series where different HGTV stars go head-to-head. At first, it seemed like an exciting opportunity. It would expose them to an even wider audience and cement their place in the HGTV family. But it also meant splitting their focus, taking on new pressures, and opening themselves up to criticism from a national stage. Despite the challenges, Bargain Block kept winning fans. Each new season brought anticipation. Viewers tuned in not just to see houses transform, but to watch Keith and Evan's dynamic unfold. They were relatable in a way few HGTV stars were. They weren't trying to be glamorous, they were trying to be authentic. And for many fans, that was the magic. Still, behind the scenes, the toll was mounting. Keith spoke openly about the exhaustion that came with trying to juggle TV demands with their real business. The Detroit housing market was unpredictable, and filming schedules made it even harder to manage. Evan admitted that while the success was thrilling, the grind of non-stop renovations and filming left little room for anything else: personal life, rest, or even enjoying their accomplishments. By the time Bargain Block had cemented itself as one of HGTV's most beloved shows, the warning signs were already there. The very qualities that made them unique, their authenticity, their quirky designs, their willingness to put everything on the line, were also the ones that left them most vulnerable to burnout and conflict. The beginning of controversy. When HGTV tapped Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas to compete on Rock the Block, it looked like the perfect opportunity. The series had become one of the network's crown jewels, a high-stakes competition where star designers were given identical houses to transform on a tight schedule. For Keith and Evan, it was a chance to showcase their talents to a wider audience and prove that their Detroit-born style could hold its own against some of HGTV's biggest names. At first, they embraced the challenge. Keith saw it as an artistic playground. 4 blank slate houses, endless possibilities. Evan, though naturally cautious, was curious to test their skills against the competition. But what began as an exciting detour quickly spiraled into the most contentious chapter of their HGTV career. From the start, Keith and Evan felt the format wasn't designed with them in mind. Unlike some contestants who had massive budgets and a preference for sleek, market-friendly designs, Keith insisted on bringing his bold, whimsical style to the table. That meant vibrant wallpaper, unconventional color palettes, and handmade pieces that reflected their Detroit projects. The other teams leaned toward modern farmhouse or luxury-neutral aesthetics, the kinds of looks that usually win in real estate markets. Keith and Evan's houses stood out, but not always in ways that judges appreciated. The real friction came not from design differences, but from what they later described as manipulation behind the scenes. Keith admitted in interviews that he felt cheated during the competition, alleging that the judging process wasn't fair and that producers prioritized drama over fairness. In one instance, he claimed a judge's feedback contradicted what producers had encouraged them to do. Evan, normally measured and diplomatic, went further. He publicly described certain producers as professional liars and manipulators. Those were strong words, especially coming from someone as restrained as Evan. It underscored just how deeply they felt wronged. According to them, the show wasn't just about showcasing talent, it was about manufacturing narratives for ratings, even at the expense of contestants' reputations. For Keith, who poured his heart into his designs, that stung the most. He wasn't just competing, he was putting his artistic identity on the line only to feel like the deck was stacked against him. The fallout was emotional as well as professional. Keith confessed that after one particularly demoralizing moment on set, he reached out to other HGTV stars, Egypt Sherrod, Ty Pennington, and Jonathan Knight among them, asking if he had ruined his career by speaking up. The fact that he even felt the need to make those calls showed how shaken he was. Competing on Rock the Block was supposed to elevate their brand. Instead, it left them questioning whether HGTV was truly invested in their future. Fans picked up on the tension too. Social media lit up with viewers defending Keith and Evan, arguing that their creativity wasn't being properly valued in a competition that rewarded safe choices. Some accused HGTV of sidelining them because their designs were too different. Others speculated that the network was intentionally editing the show to paint them in a less favorable light. Whether or not that was true, the perception of unfairness spread quickly. In the months following the competition, Keith spoke more candidly about his disillusionment. He described feeling lied to and cheated, words that left no room for misinterpretation. Evan backed him up, though in his typical understated way, calling out the manipulation without dwelling on the details. Together, they made it clear that Rock the Block had been a turning point, not just in their careers, but in their trust with the network. The controversy highlighted an uncomfortable truth about reality competition shows. They aren't always as real as they seem. Behind the glossy edits and dramatic reveals are producers shaping storylines, steering outcomes, and sometimes sacrificing authenticity for entertainment value. Keith and Evan were willing to play the game, but only if it was fair. And when they felt it wasn't, they couldn't stay silent. For HGTV, the drama may have been just another storyline in a long-running series. But for Keith and Evan, it was personal. They had built their brand on authenticity, on being true to themselves and their vision. To feel undermined by the very platform that elevated them cut deep. Looking back, Rock the Block marked the beginning of their unraveling relationship with the network. What was supposed to be a celebration of their talent instead became a source of pain and distrust. And while viewers only saw flashes of the tension on screen behind closed doors, the experience left scars that would soon become impossible to hide. For fans of Bargain Block, the news came like a gut punch. After 5 seasons of watching Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas breathe life into forgotten Detroit houses, HGTV abruptly announced that the show would not be returning. The shocking cancellation. No grand farewell, no celebratory wrap-up season, just the sudden end of one of the network's most unique and beloved series. At first, the reaction was disbelief. Bargain Block wasn't just popular, it was a critical darling, praised for its authenticity and its mission-driven storytelling. Viewers had connected deeply with Keith and Evan's vision of rebuilding communities through affordable housing. Unlike many HGTV shows that revolved around luxury upgrades or aspirational living, Bargain Block had soul. So why would HGTV pull the plug on one of its most distinctive hits? Keith and Evan themselves seemed just as stunned. In interviews, Keith admitted that the cancellation blindsided them. They had been in the middle of working on projects that were intended for the next season, only to find out that everything was suddenly on hold. What should have been another step forward in their journey turned into a moment of crisis. Their plans, investments, and schedules had been built around the show's continuation, and now all of it was up in the air. Keith didn't hold back his feelings. On social media and in interviews, he spoke openly about the frustration and disappointment. He described the last 6 months as some of the hardest of their careers, saying their business and lives have been put through the ringer at the hands of a giant corporation. It was an unusually candid critique for an HGTV star, many of whom typically avoid criticizing the network publicly. Keith, however, wasn't willing to sugarcoat what he saw as a betrayal. Evan, characteristically more reserved, also hinted at the emotional toll. While he didn't lash out as directly, he backed up Keith's accounts of how the sudden cancellation had thrown their lives into disarray. Together, their statements painted a picture of 2 men who had given everything to the network, only to feel abandoned when the ratings game shifted or corporate interests changed. The fan response was immediate and intense. Viewers flooded HGTV's social media pages with comments demanding an explanation. Petitions began circulating online, urging the network to reconsider. Some fans speculated that the cancellation was connected to the fallout from Rock the Block, while others believed it was simply a business decision by executives looking for cheaper or flashier programming. Whatever the reason, it was clear that the audience wasn't ready to say goodbye. Part of the sting came from how personal Bargain Block felt. Fans had watched Keith and Evan not just design houses but pour their identities into each project. Every home told a story about resilience, creativity, and the belief that affordable housing could still be beautiful. To see that mission cut short by a corporate decision felt wrong. For many viewers, it wasn't just the end of a TV show. It was the end of a movement that had given hope to Detroit's neighborhoods. Behind the scenes, the financial implications were equally severe. Keith and Evan weren't just TV personalities, they were also business owners. Their design company, 9 Design Plus Homes, relied on the momentum and visibility that came from the show. Losing that platform meant losing a critical revenue stream and a powerful marketing tool. For two people who had risked everything to take on Detroit's housing challenges, the cancellation was more than disappointing, it was destabilizing. The way it all unfolded made the situation even harder to swallow. There was no clear explanation from HGTV, no acknowledgement of the show's cultural impact or fan loyalty. It felt to Keith and Evan like they had been quietly brushed aside. And if their experiences on Rock the Block had already planted seeds of mistrust, the cancellation watered them into full-blown disillusionment. For years, they had been the quirky underdogs who brought something fresh and authentic to HGTV. But now, stripped of their platform, they were left to reckon with the reality of life after Bargain Block. And the more Keith spoke out, the clearer it became that this wasn't just about one show being canceled. It was about a larger story of how networks handle talent, creativity, and loyalty in an industry driven by ratings. The shock of Bargain Block's cancellation wasn't just in the loss of a beloved show, it was in what it revealed about the fragile relationship between creators and corporations. For Keith and Evan, it marked the breaking point in their partnership with HGTV, and it set the stage for a very public fallout that fans never expected to see. The cancellation of Bargain Block was shocking enough, but what came after turned it into one of the most talked about controversies in HGTV history. Fallout with HGTV. Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas had always been seen as the network's golden couple. Quirky, relatable, and endlessly creative. Yet once their show was cut, the gloves came off. For the first time, fans saw what Keith and Evan really thought about the network that made them famous. And the picture wasn't pretty. Keith was the first to go public. In a series of candid social media posts, he accused HGTV and its parent company of mishandling their careers and treating them unfairly. He didn't mince words, describing the last year as brutal and saying their lives had been upended by decisions made far above their heads. His most striking comment was that their business and lives were put through the ringer at the hands of a giant corporation. For a network star to call out HGTV so directly was almost unheard of. Most talents, even when disgruntled, stay silent. Keith wasn't going to play that game. Evan, as always, was the quieter of the two, but his silence didn't mean he disagreed. When he did speak, it was to back Keith up. He confirmed that producers had been manipulative, describing some of them as professional liars. Coming from Evan, the practical, measured half of the duo, those words carried weight. It wasn't just Keith venting frustrations, it was both of them, united in their disappointment. The heart of the fallout boiled down to trust. For years, Keith and Evan had believed in HGTV's mission and had given everything to make Bargain Block a success. They poured their own money into projects, sacrificed sleep, and put their personal lives on hold. They weren't just flipping houses for cameras, they were living the grind every day. In return, they expected honesty, respect, and support. Instead, they felt misled and discarded. What made the situation even more bitter was the contrast between how HGTV presented them on screen and how they felt treated behind the scenes. On television, Keith and Evan were marketed as shining examples of the network's creativity and heart. In press campaigns, they were celebrated as rising stars. But off-camera, Keith claimed they were undermined, pressured, and ultimately dropped without a proper explanation. For them, it was a harsh lesson. In the television world, being beloved by fans doesn't guarantee protection from executive decisions. Other HGTV stars began to weigh in, some publicly, others more quietly. Keith mentioned reaching out to friends in the industry, including Egypt Sherrod, Ty Pennington, and Jonathan Knight, when he felt uncertain about his future. Their support reassured him that he hadn't made a mistake by speaking up. Still, it was clear that tensions were brewing within the HGTV family. If one of its most charming, relatable duos could turn on the network, what did that say about how talent was treated behind the curtain? Fans, meanwhile, were furious. The outrage over Bargain Block's cancellation morphed into a wider conversation about HGTV's priorities. Viewers questioned why the network would cut a show that celebrated affordable housing and creativity, while continuing to churn out safer, more formulaic content. Social media was flooded with calls for boycotts, with fans accusing HGTV of betraying not just Keith and Evan, but also the audience that had supported them. Speculation about the real reasons behind the fallout spread quickly. Some believed it was purely financial, that HGTV didn't want to keep funding a show with smaller profit margins. Others tied it back to the Rock the Block controversy, suggesting that Keith and Evan's outspoken criticism of producers had put them on the network's bad side. While no official explanation was given, the silence from HGTV only fueled the rumors. What was undeniable was the damage to the relationship. Keith and Evan were no longer just former network stars, they had become vocal critics. Their candor set them apart from many in the reality TV world, where silence and diplomacy often rule. Instead of playing it safe, they chose to tell fans exactly how they felt, and in doing so, they broke the illusion that HGTV was a perfect family-friendly empire. The fallout revealed a deeper truth about the industry. Reality TV is rarely as real as it seems. Behind the charming couples and dramatic reveals are contracts, negotiations, and corporate decisions that don't always align with the rosy image on screen. Keith and Evan's willingness to lift the curtain made them both admired and controversial. To some, they were heroes for speaking truth to power. To others, they were burning bridges they might one day regret. For Keith and Evan, though, there was no going back. The trust had been broken, and the partnership with HGTV was over. What remained was the task of rebuilding not just houses but their careers without the network that had once been their biggest stage. When the cameras stopped rolling on Bargain Block, many wondered what would become of Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas. For years, their lives had been intertwined with the show, projects, its deadlines, and its national spotlight. Without it, the couple faced a crossroads. Would they fade from view, or would they find a way to reinvent themselves outside the HGTV machine? Life after Bargain Block. The answer, as it turned out, was a mix of resilience, reinvention, and a little bit of defiance. Keith and Evan weren't about to let the end of a TV contract define them. If anything, the cancellation seemed to spark a new fire. One of their first moves was to double down on their design business, 9 Design Plus Homes. Long before HGTV came knocking, Keith and Evan had been pouring their creativity into Detroit houses, turning forgotten properties into unique homes. After Bargain Block, they returned to those roots, this time with the advantage of name recognition and a loyal fan base. Their social media channels became showcases for new projects, with behind-the-scenes looks at renovations that didn't need to fit neatly into a network storyline. Free from television's constraints, they could experiment more, share more, and work at their own pace. But business wasn't the only focus. The couple also leaned into direct fan engagement. Instead of relying on HGTV's promotional machine, Keith and Evan began cultivating their own platforms. Instagram and YouTube updates gave fans glimpses of their latest projects, personal lives, and even frustrations. The transparency that had once gotten them into trouble with network executives now became a strength. Fans loved the authenticity, and many felt even closer to them without the filter of television producers. Still, life after Bargain Block wasn't without its challenges. The financial strain of losing a national show was real. HGTV has provided not just exposure, but also stability, something that independent designers rarely have. Without it, Keith and Evan had to hustle harder, take on more risk, and rebuild the business side of their careers. It wasn't glamorous, but it was theirs. There was also the question of what's next for television. Despite the fallout, Keith and Evan didn't rule out a return to the screen, but on their own terms. Rumors swirled about potential deals with streaming platforms or even independent production efforts. The couple teased possibilities in interviews, making it clear that while they loved connecting with fans, they weren't willing to jump back into a corporate arrangement that left them feeling powerless. If they were to do TV again, it would be with contracts that gave them creative control. What stood out most in this new chapter was their determination to protect the mission that had always driven them. Bargain Block may have been canceled, but their belief in affordable, stylish housing never wavered. They continued buying and renovating homes in Detroit, proving that their commitment went beyond television fame. For Keith and Evan, the work itself, the transformation of neglected properties into welcoming homes, was always the heart of their story. And fans stuck with them. The loyalty they had built over 5 seasons didn't vanish when HGTV cut ties. If anything, the cancellation made supporters more protective of them. Followers flooded their pages with encouragement, bought merchandise, and even traveled to Detroit to see their projects firsthand. It was a reminder that while networks control airtime, they don't own the bond between creators and their audience. In many ways, life after Bargain Block became about freedom. No more manufactured drama for ratings, no more producers dictating edits. Keith and Evan could now share their world exactly as they experienced it, the highs, the struggles, the messy reality of building a life together through creativity and grit. Yes, the loss of their show hurt. Yes, the fallout with HGTV left scars. But Keith Bynum and Evan Thomas weren't finished. Far from it. Their story was shifting from being HGTV stars to something even more personal. 2 designers, partners in life and business, charting their own course without anyone telling them how it should look. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe and click on the next video on your screen.